Christ is King! Christ is King! Christ is King! Christ is King! Christ is King!
So in the wake of Charlie Kirk's death, you've seen loads of, I guess, Christian communities around the world mourning for him. And I think more than anything, what this shows is the increasing Americanization of just global politics, because there's no reason you'd think for people in like South Korea, Mexico, and even the UK to be bawling their eyes out over this guy, but seemingly there's enough people that care that there's protests, there's people, having vigils for him and singing songs about him and stuff like that. But I also saw screenshots of like protests in Australia, and there's like 1776 flags and Don't Tread on Me American libertarian flags. And I think you could probably do this for every English speaking country, and maybe even just like every Western country, that how we've become so Americanized. But today I wanted to focus on UK politics, specifically using what's happened to Charlie Kirk and the reaction, and talk about how we've increasingly become Americanized. Now, a lot of people who watch this who aren't from like Western countries and aren't from England or America, you might just look at our politics and see them as very similar. They're obviously different, in one being a constitutional monarchy with a parliament and one being a republic, but you probably just see a lot of the fear-mongering, a lot of the racism, the xenophobia, and think, well, Nigel Farage or Boris Johnson is Donald Trump, and they're very similar. And you'd be right in a lot of ways. It's pretty true that most Western countries are going through the exact same problems, mainly ineffective liberal governments being ousted by fascist movements who usually scapegoating refugees from the Middle East and North Africa to sweep into power and basically just pursue crazy libertarian economics, right? But I think it's also true to say that British politics isn't like American politics for a variety of reasons. And I think the big one is the lack of religious influence on our politics has really kind of separated us. Like when you see the Republicans in America historically, or, since I've been alive, they seem so crazy because they are so fanatical in their religion, right? But that gap is getting closer and closer because increasingly with the Americanization, there is more explicit references to Christianity and taking up issues that the American far right traditionally love and bringing it to the UK. Things like women's rights and women's rights to choose, for example, is now apparently a conversation we're having in the UK, despite in my lifetime not remembering even like the Tory party ever campaigning on these things. Apparently now it's back on the table, and it's really, really worrying. And I keep just thinking about this. So how like China kind of like isolates its own internet and even cracks down on VPNs? I'm thinking they're like ahead of the game, because I don't know if isolating the UK's internet would have been good. But in the Simpsons movie, when they put a dome over Springfield, if we could put some sort of like internet dome over America so that Americans couldn't influence us online, I think the world would just be a much better place. I'm half joking about that, but I'm pretty sure that's what people said when Americans were banned off TikTok earlier this year, that it just was like a better experience. And I think that would be true, to be honest. I appreciate all my American followers. Most of you are Americans, but also from experience, you guys are probably the first to tell me that I probably would be correct. And isolated Americans to themselves on the internet, the world would be a better place. But I just want to talk about all of this today. But yeah, follow me on social media at the Kavernacle on Instagram and on Blue Sky. If you want to support my work, please check out my Patreon page or support me on YouTube memberships. And let's just get into the video. So, like I was alluding to at the start, there are differences between American and British politics. And I think we should establish the differences before we talk about how we're becoming Americanized. And a lot of you are older, so you could speak to this a bit more. But basically, the big difference with British politics, I feel like, is the classism in British politics. So what that means is, to like political groups and political parties, there is a version of a prime minister that is somewhat acceptable. It looks like Keir Starmer. It looks like David Cameron. It looks like Tony Blair. It looks like these types of people, usually white, middle to upper class men who have gone to higher education that most of the elite go to, like London School of Economics, Oxbridge, gone to Eton and stuff like that, and they speak in a certain way. You never discuss your Christian faith. I remember we had this Liberal Democrat leader, I've forgotten his name right now, but he started talking about his Christian faith, and he was essentially ousted from the Liberal Democrats because he wouldn't stop talking about it, because that was taboo in British politics. You don't start banging on about God. Of course, you are a Christian, and you have to sometimes make reference to that, but if you start talking about like God speaking to you, reading the Bible, people really, really tend to not like that in the past. So you need a higher education, you need to speak a certain way, and in terms of the way political campaigns are done, I would say British politics are really fucking boring. The slogans are cringe. It's a bunch of middle-class white English dads who have to be so PC, they can't even try and be edgy or funny. They have to come up with these political campaigns, and that's why British politics like seems so bizarre sometimes, because these campaigns are so sanitized. But it is nothing like American politics. It's never like a TV show. It's never like a reality show. For the most part, especially in terms of political campaigns, it's very, very boring. And British people primarily care about things that are less glamorous, right? So, you know, Americans care about like the military and shit like that. Most British people don't vote based on who supports the military more. Of course, you want to see someone who's patriotic, or the masses do, someone who loves the monarchy, for example. But people don't primarily vote based on military shit and even culture war shit generally. It's mainly about economic issues. And sadly, over the last 10 years especially, but probably longer, immigration is like the number one issue. And that is, of course, a similarity we have always shared with America, with Western countries. This whipped up hysteria, which gave us things like Brexit, which gave us things like the Tories multiple times, which gave us people like Keir Starmer. But even when they talk about that, it is less flashy and more like austere, I guess. And I guess that is something I appreciate a bit about British politics, that it doesn't get so showy and over the top that it completely removes itself from the issues. But British politics is also like a crabs in a bucket mentality, in that there is no room for optimism and hope. Like Obama 2008, that campaign is like the antithesis of British politics. British politics is about making your life incrementally better, but you have to know your place. So there is no room for promising hope and change most of the time. Corbyn did try that a little bit, but even that is nothing compared to Obama. And I think part of that is because the ruling class don't want a significant shake-up of British politics, right? So Keir Starmer is just for Tories, but he's pretty much just done what the Tories would have done anyway. He continues the status quo. So he wouldn't even promise the world in the campaign to get elected, because then there'd be more pressure to deliver. But he also probably wouldn't be in his position if he would do shit like that, because the people who control the UK don't want people with aspirations in the UK. The UK is very against people having aspirations. We, as a society, we love to drag people down. As a society, you're really indoctrinated in not wanting better. You want a middle-class life at best, and you're not to complain also because America is so bad. And that's something we have constantly been beat over the head with, no matter how bad our political system gets, is, well, look at America. Well, you could live there. You could pay £30,000 for like a hospital visit. And even though we're destroying the NHS right now, it's still way better than that. What about the shootings? Go live in America if you hate it so bad. Oh, you wouldn't do that, right? Because Britain is actually a great place to live. And I do like the UK, and I am glad I grew up there, and I'm glad I grew up in London. I had a great childhood, I had a great teenage years, adulthood. But it's sad to just see the way we're going. And now, probably since Brexit, we've had a massive influence from American Trumpism and American-style campaigning. So reform is probably the best evidence of this, but I wouldn't say it's just reform. Reform is just, I guess, taking a load of American rhetoric and issues and using it to kind of make an impact in British politics. But I think their fascist message would be eaten up anyway, because we've had a Labour government and loads of Tory governments that have dragged the Overton window so far right. They're literally just laying the electorate on a plate for a further right group to come in and take over. And the reason we haven't had fascist parties have much success in the UK historically is because the Tories have always filled that need, right? Because they have been so far right, they have been so crazy with their austerity policies. The elites have never really wanted someone else to come in and be even worse. When you have Thatcher, where is there really to go? But now what you're getting is people who are more explicitly like Thatcher, but also combining it with like 2025 xenophobia, racism, and fascism. So how this relates to Charlie Kirk is I made my video about the insane British reaction to Charlie Kirk, where the political class and the media class were acting like everyone knew who this guy was when most people wouldn't know who this person was. And it comes from, I guess, groups like Turning Point and the UK branch of that having some sort of influence on the media, and also the media now just giving in to reform non-stop. So they feel like because some far-right person in America was killed, they have to now cover that 24/7 because they're trying to appease reform all the time. So I just want to talk about this, and I have seen some really funny stuff. So apparently the Queen was a massive fan of Charlie Kirk. So maybe I'm wrong about, people in the UK not knowing who he was. So Queen Elizabeth II was reportedly very interested in and even loved Charlie Kirk's work. She admired his sincere love of Christ and his mission to guide young people back to the church. There's an article from Newsmax, so very, very reputable, which says here, she quietly backed Charlie Kirk's Turning Point. So Charlie Kirk had developed close ties in the UK through a businessman called John Mappin, the heir to Mappin and Webb jewellery family. Mappin was one of the original financial backers of Turning Point, and he says the Queen was privately briefed on Kirk's activities at Windsor Castle and expressed warm encouragement, according to the Telegraph. Shortly before Charlie's arrival, our friends Lord and Lady Plunkett co-hosted the Turning Point launch of us, and they briefed the late Queen and Prince Philip about what Charlie was doing. Prince Philip found it fascinating, while she just loved the idea that Charlie was bringing younger people back to the church. I'm just going to say that the Queen didn't know who Charlie Kirk was and probably didn't give a shit about who Charlie Kirk was. Like, the fact that someone who was nearly 100, who met, like, literally the most famous people nearly ever in history, like, multiple times throughout her life, and continued to do so until she died, was fascinated by an American far-right podcaster coming to the UK for a little bit. Come on. even as racist as the Queen probably was, and, she was very religious, I doubt she would have given a single shit who Charlie Kirk was. But anyway, like I said, the Charlie Kirk death had spawned loads of, memorials around London. And this is what I'm talking about. I'm going to get into this a bit more. Seeing this shit in the UK is so alien to me. I saw, Gen Z, younger guys with, Christ is King, posters they were bringing to these vigils. I'm like, what the fuck am I even looking at?
Christ is King! 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 Christ is King!
Imagining myself as a 15-year-old to 18-year-old even knowing anyone who would give a shit about that 10 years ago, or when I was that age, 15 years ago, is how? But that's what social media is doing. Social media is influencing young people to actually give a shit about very niche American politics. And I say that as someone who covers loads of American politics, and I'm a British person. But yeah, men usually, or used to, have better things to do, which would be literally anything than pretending to be religious and loving Charlie Kirk. But you see on Turning Point's UK Twitter account, Charlie Kirk's Turning Point march through Speaker's Corner, the home of free speech, to honour Charlie. So this fucking shit with crosses and all this religious stuff, holy fuck, this is just the most alien shit ever in the UK. Seeing this stuff, yeah, you see a lot of crazy shit on Speaker's Corner up London. But again, that's what I'm saying. The Americanization of British politics is coming, and it's been here for a while. So you're seeing these fucking weirdos with these crosses marching around because an American podcaster died. But then there's more stuff like this as well. Charlie Kirk supporters chant, "We love Charlie Kirk," and the Trump arms in London. I didn't even know this was a fucking place. Reformatories packed for our memorial for Charlie Kirk. Thank you for everyone who came. Now, this is absolutely shameless, right? So you guys might not know who the Conservative leader is right now, because the Conservatives are an utterly irrelevant party. They're having their lunch eaten by Reform, and many of them are seeing the writing on the wall, and they're all defecting to Reform. But there is still a leader of the Conservatives, Kemi Badenoch, and look how shameless this is, but it's also pathetic. So she goes, "The murder of Charlie Kirk created a shockwave, and many across the world are holding vigils for him. Political violence has no place in a democratic society, but more and more it starts at universities. I met with a group of Turning Point who shared troubling accounts of violence they've faced across Britain at the hands of masked left-wing activists." And Turning Point saying, "Thank you, Kemi, for meeting with our team. You are the only MP and elected party leader who reached out to us, and it means a lot. So I think that should show you both how fringe it is and how desperate the Conservatives are getting. But also this rhetoric about mask Antifa beating right-wing students at universities. This is just not a thing that happens in the UK. It's just not a thing. Has there maybe been violence before in this nature at a UK university? Sure. Is it something that happens? No. Where does this rhetoric come from? America. It's happening right now in America. It happened last year under Joe Biden as well with the anti-Israel protests across universities. But again, it's so alien. And it shows it's alien still because you are the only MP and elected party leader who reached out to us. Yeah, because it's an American fucking thing and she's desperate to try and get some sort of attention. But Turning Point are obviously never going to back the Tories being led by a British Nigerian woman. That's why they're joining Reform in the first place. They think the Tories are too woke because they had several female leaders and also a South Asian prime minister. They don't want that. They're explicitly anti-diversity at all. But yes, again, American fucking influence. You might see that and think, oh, it's just the Charlie Kirk group. It's just Turning Point and all the freaks in the UK who support that. And you'd be right to think that there is a loud minority, but it's growing. And it's growing because you can see that through the various party conferences. Now, there was something called the National Conservative Conference. This was like 2 years ago, where I started thinking, holy shit, like the UK has lost its mind going like American-style politics. And I'm not going to cover this too much, but it was just a load of the most like far-right Conservatives, obviously when the Tories still had power, pretty much exclusively focused on culture war issues. Now, culture war issues aren't, again, foreign to the UK, but the types of shit they're talking about was an import from America. But we go 2 years later, and now there is a Reform UK conference, right? So HuffPost just did a nice little rundown of just how much of a sideshow this is, right? And if you're looking at this and thinking, well, Reform is a small party right now, they don't have many seats in Parliament, and it's fringe, right? But it's not fringe. All the polling shows that they could do very well in the next election, especially if we don't have proportional representation, they could even get a majority, right? So while you're looking at this and looking like it is a clown show, it's an American-style clown show, but also it feels like the inevitable conclusion of the UK having its own Fox News as well, because we had GB News, which Nigel Farage, Jacob Rees-Mogg, these people are always on. GB News has also helped in the Americanization of British politics, along with things like Twitter. So now we see something like this that feels like I'm watching some sort of American shit, but it's not. It's in the UK, done by British patriots who think the Queen's still alive, apparently. But 4 completely bonkers things that happened at the Reform UK conference from Kevin Schofield. So, Reform UK's conference in Birmingham has come and gone, and for fans of the strange and odd, it did not disappoint. Farage had hoped that the glitzy 2-day event would show the country that his party is professional, and while there were certain moments which demonstrated why Reform is currently leading the polls, there was also enough evidence to suggest it had a long way to go before it could shake off its eccentric image. Farage was forced to bring forward his keynote speech at the conference on Friday to avoid being overshadowed by the cabinet shuffle, but it was the actions of Reform leaders' warm-up act, Dame Andrea Jenkins, that grabbed the headlines. The mayor of Greater Lincolnshire, a trained opera singer, strode onto the stage in a sparkling jumpsuit to a recording of her self-penned song, I'm an Insomniac. For reasons known only to herself, Jenkins decided to join in with her arms outstretched in an attempt to G up the crowd before the event. In an attempt to link the song's lyrics to the conference, the former Tory MP asked the audience, is this god-awful Labour government giving you sleepless nights and insomnia too? The muted response from the presumably stunned audience spoke volumes. So, anti-vax doctor says COVID vaccine gave King cancer. Reform officials have been at pains to stress the party is not home to conspiracy theorists and extremists, but that was undermined by the fact that a vaccine-skeptic doctor was allowed to give a speech from the main conference stage, claiming the COVID vaccine was linked to cancer in the royal family. After claiming vaccines created havoc in the human body, Dr. Azim Malhotra said, highly likely that the COVID vaccines have been a factor in the cancer of the members of the royal family. And then Andrea Jenkins singing again. The conference ended with senior Reform members standing awkwardly on the conference stage singing the national anthem. Leading the sing-along was Andrea Jenkins, whose voice almost gave in, and she changed the lyrics to God Save the Queen, even though Elizabeth II died 3 years ago. So this is obviously funny, right? But it's also not funny. So I'm reading that for you and talking about how bizarre this is. Anti-vax doctors people singing the national anthem like it's America, and just like the cringe-inducingness of politics essentially becoming some sort of like TV show, right? Something you see in America all the time. But it's not funny because these people are leading the polls. And just like with the Nazis in Germany, just like with Trump, and what we're seeing, what Trump has done in his second term, what this does is it paves the way for every lunatic, conspiracy theorist, extremist to get a seat at the table through this far-right party. Look who's controlling the FDA and the CDC in America right now. Britain historically hasn't been anti-vaccine. Obviously the pandemic helped ramp this up because of things like Twitter, but historically people have been pretty good with getting their children vaccinated, with taking vaccines. You saw in the pandemic as well, people very good at getting them and stuff like that. People believe generally the science of health a lot, and we learned this in school, and I feel like the UK population are better in America. But if we start letting these people in, these anti-vax crazy people will be like the next health secretary. And of course, Capital doesn't give a shit. Like these people have massive backers. Nigel Farage has massive wealthy backers. They care about Farage deregulating the economy primarily, right? So they don't care what else happens. They don't care about him letting in all the crazies. But in fascist movements, they care most about loyalty and what you can bring to the table in terms of how much support you can give them, right? So that's why I'm so fearful, because I'm looking at this, I'm being like, it's such an alien thing to see a political conference that looks like this and have like anti-vax speakers and all this craziness. That's just what's happening with GB News as well, and with Elon Musk on Twitter directing a lot of this shit. The Americanization of British politics, where everyone's singing God Save the King, everyone has like a British flag, everyone's anti-vax, everyone's a fucking crazy racist, and they no longer even give a shit about material reality. They only care about culture war. There is no economic argument being made. There is no economic ideology being expressed that people actually like. It's literally pure culture war, and it's going to rot the UK. And Labour are responding by engaging in pure culture war. Like, what is Labour's answer economically to the rise of reform? They don't fucking have one. So they try and engage in the culture war where Keir Starmer stands in front of a bunch of flags again. He's switched them up from the UK flags to an England flag instead now. And it's just absolutely pathetic. And that's how the UK is basically destroying itself. It's cannibalizing itself. And that is, along with most of Western Europe right now, they're committed, the political and media class, to ensuring the status quo keeps going, right? And because capitalism is a death cult, they would rather these countries absolutely destroy themselves instead of maybe changing for the better and getting socialists in power who will tax people more and actually make the countries work for the many. They would absolutely hate that. They would rather short-term gains, so 20 years of fascist rule destroying a country. That's great for the upper class who will loot these countries like they have done in other failed states before. And that's where reform and these far-right parties will get Western European countries. And sadly, that's why I'm so doom-appealed about the UK. Now the Americanism is coming in and no one's stopping it. And it's just going to take over, and we are just going to have anti-vaxxers in charge. We're just going to have these absolutely fanatical Christians in charge. We're going to have so much alien shit that has never been okay in modern British politics absolutely take over the country, and I'm not going to recognise it in like 20 years because it's all going to be filled with Christian fanatics, I bet. And that is just the depressing reality of the Americanization of UK politics. And I primarily blame social media, but of course we do have a lot of shared cultural stuff with America anyway. But like I said, if we could just put like a social media internet dome over America forever, we wouldn't be saved, but the world would be better off. So that is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.